Hello and welcome. This is an ACE 2 video for OCR economics. I'm just altered the camera angle, see if that makes any difference. Because it was coming out orange before, it's a bit less orange, but anyway, sorry about the quality. Now what we're going to be doing today is I'm just going to be kicking off with a small recap on marginal revenue product. And then I'll be talking about, as the title suggests, just put the agenda up here, I'll be going through the determinants for the demand of labour, what determines the amount that labour is demanded, and then I'll go through the wage elasticity of demand and how that relates to price elasticity of demand, but it's wage elasticity of demand for labour. So it's slightly different, but the ideas behind it even are pretty much the same, so you don't need to worry so much about that. Okay, so let's kick things off. I'm not going to write this off on the board. You should know marginal revenue product is marginal revenue times marginal product. Marginal revenue being the price of the product. And obviously the marginal revenue is the bit that is added on when you add on one more worker. What do they add to the total revenue? That's marginal revenue. Hopefully you should know that. Then we're going to discuss the determinants of demand for labour. Now there are quite a few, but there's three that I like to remember. So I'll sort of leave a space on the board. So determinants of demand for labour. Okay, now labour, we got to remember to kick things off. The first one to be thinking about labour is what we now know as a derived demand, and now what we mean by that in terms of the labour perspective is labour produces something. Firms don't demand labour for the sake of it, as I mentioned in my last video. So the price of this end good must have some reference to the demand for the worker of that who produces that kind of good. So if we're talking, if the good's worth nothing that the worker produces, then why would the firm, even if there's demand for the products, why would the firm employ this worker? So obviously the price of the finished product has some influence on it. Or the product that labour produces. I'm just going to put price of the finished product, because I already started writing that. Another one could be, so some firms use more capital than labour, so it depends on the price of capital or labour. So the price of capital, because as we know, firms want to maximise profit. That's the aim of most firms, apart from your odd exception of your social enterprise, or actually your exception of your football clubs that just are there to just maintain a steady profit, but there for winning trophies, etc. Manchester United. Price of capital. Now, if the price of capital is less than the wage rate in terms of what it produces, then obviously firms will demand more capital equipment, so it should be price of capital equipment actually. Another one is productivity of the workers. Now this relates to the demand for labour. Now if the workers in a certain segment are very productive, so the unit cost for that worker will be quite low, so the firm can make a reasonable profit on each unit that the worker produces. So there's going to be a high demand if there's high productivity of each worker. Okay, what we're going to go on to now is, if you want to split your page off, if you've wrote all them down, is the wage elasticity of demand for labour. Now, I said at the beginning of this video that the wage elasticity of demand for labour is very much like the price elasticity of demand for goods that we were looking at in F581. That's why the F583 topic, the one I'm doing on the board behind me, is very closely related to your F581 topics. Now, the reason it's related is because if you cast your mind back to what I said in elasticity video for F581, OCR economics, we said the first variable, so if it was price elasticity of demand, the second variable always went on the top, and the first variable always went on the bottom. So if we use that case, which works, so we can always remember it for this, and we did the percentage change, if you remember. So we did the percentage change of price on the top, of demand, sorry, on the top, which of demand for labour. So we're going to put percentage change in labour demanded, or demand for labour. Sorry, it's a bit squeezed on there. And obviously then it's wage elasticity, or wage rate, or percentage change in wage rate. So we're changing wage rate. Now, a couple of things to know about that. Obviously, if the wage increases, then so they're sort of sorry, not explaining. Sure. So when we said price elasticity of demand, we said if it was between 0 and 1 in terms of magnitude, then it was inelastic. However, if it was greater than 1, then what we said was it had a elastic effect. Now we've got to again reference these elastic. Well, yeah, what is it inelastic, or what is elastic of? Well, if it's, because we're talking about labour here, it's the demand for labour is inelastic if it's between 0 and 1, and if it's greater than 1, then it's labour is demand elastic in terms of the wage rate. Because obviously we're saying what's the response of the demand for labour for a change in the wage rate, or the wage elasticity. It should be wage rate elasticity, but I'm just going to leave it as wage because I can't bother to get my finger all nice and red it's later. But anyway, so obviously that's why it's sort of linked in with your F581 price elasticity of demand, because we said the second variable always goes on the top, so duck in pond sort of thing from F581. And if it was between 0 and 1, then it's elastic, and then if it's greater than 1, then it is elastic. So that's kind of what we were talking about there. Alright, so just as there was determinants for price elasticity of demand back in F581, there's going to be determinants for wage elasticity of demand as well. So what are these determinants? Well, they are quite closely related to the determinants for demand, as was in F581. So again, we're sort of linking it back to F581 here. So what are the determinants then? Well, the determinants is one of them is how easy it is to switch between the two. So if you've got a worker that does a job that a machine can't do, then it's going to be quite difficult to change your percentage demand for labour if there's a sudden change in the wage rate. So that's one. So I write that as ease of change. Now you can put ease of change to substitutes, but generally substitutes are capital, so I just put ease of change to capital equipment. And then another one could be, sorry, I'll try to do these without looking off the top of my head. Let me just mess that up. So basically we talked about the price of the final product. Now obviously that we said that has some kind of an impact on the determinants for demand. So it's going to have some kind of impact on the determinants for the elasticity. So basically the price elasticity of demand for the finished products has a direct effect on the wage elasticity of demand for labour. So if the same sort of thing applies. So if there's price and elasticity of demand of the product that labour produces, so PED of the final product, sorry. And because labour is a derived demand, if there's the type of demand that is in for the final products, it's going to be the type of demand for the labour. So if you can kind of think of it as complementary products, again, that we used in F581, where we said they both have, if one good is a byproduct of another good, then they will have the same price elasticity of demand. Oh, we sort of worked out in cross elasticity in terms of substitutes, but anyway, so basically from that, what you need to know is the price elasticity of the demand of the final product is equal to the wage elasticity of demand of the demand for labour. Another determinant is proportion of the total cost made up by labour. Now, this sort of goes back to the ease of change to capital equipment. Now, some firms are very capital intensive and some firms are more labour intensive. And what do we mean by them two variations? Well, your labour intensive, obviously, you've got more workers. That's the idea of labour intensive. So if you've got more workers, it's going to represent a larger proportion of your costs. It's going to be labour costs, such as salaries or wages. Salary it is for me. For God's sake. This other determinant is the proportion of total costs made up by labour. Now, I'm just going to put a side thing off there that says depends type of business, type of intensive business. And obviously what we mean by that is it's capital or labour. So just to go over that again, recap what we've done in this video. We originally talked about the demand for labour and the determinants of the demand. Now we talked about because labour is a derived demand, so basically we said the price of the final product will be how responsive the worker is, the firm is to hiring that worker in terms of the wage change, wage rate changes even. Then we also said how easy it is for them to switch between the price of capital equipment. So basically, determinants of demand for labour is the price of capital equipment, because obviously firms will want to make as much profit as possible. So if it's cheaper for them to use capital equipment, they will do. And then we also said about the price of the finished product. And then we said about the productivity of the workers, because if the workers are more productive in a certain sector, they will be more productive than machines. And then we said the wage elasticity of demand for labour. We said that's quite similar to price elasticity of demand in terms of it's inelastic if it's between 0 and 1, or elastic if it's greater than 1. And we said the same sort of formula applies, so it's percentage change in labour demanded over percentage change in the wage rate. Determinants, well, how easy is it to be switched between them? So if the wage rate increases, would the firms be able to easily just replace the worker with some kind of capital equipment? Another one could be the price elasticity demand of the final product, because we sort of talked about before about the determinant of labour demand in terms of that's reliant on the price of the final product, because labour is a derived demand. If there's a sudden change in the price of the product, obviously the demand will be affected. It will be reduced if the price increases, and then the demand for the labour will decrease because there's not much demand in the product, so it's not as much needed in terms of the labour force to produce that amount of product, because obviously the amount you produce is smaller, hence you will need less labour or less people to produce the smaller amount of good that is being demanded. Because the law of demand says if the price goes up, then the demand for a good will fall or vice versa. So that's sort of a bit of background there to substantiate that. Then the determinant for the wage elasticity of demand of labour, we said the proportion of costs that are made up by labour. So this is representative of what type of business we are talking about. So if we're talking about capital intensive, so just to reiterate that, a capital intensive business is a business that relies heavily on machinery, so they won't be affected so much by changing wage rate, because yes, they will have to pay their workers more, but because they don't have that many workers as they're capital intensive, then it won't be as effective to them as a business that is more the other way around. So we're talking about a business that is more reliant on workers and then paying them workers a lower wage, so they have to say, is it worth keeping on these workers? Probably not. We'll get rid of them and replace them by a machine, which links to the other determinant for how easy it is to do that. So there's three. So just to recap that again for me as well, the determinants of demand for labour. We talked about the price of the final product, the productivity of the workers, the price of capital, and then we said for the PED, so the wage elasticity of demand for labour, we said the ease that you could switch between them, the proportion of total cost that is made up by your labour, and then we said the PED, the final product, because obviously labour is derived demand. So I've gone over that a few times because I think that's a little bit tricky, even though the theory, there's not that much in terms of the theory to get your head around it, sort of making sure you get them in the right sort of order. I think that's a little bit difficult. Now there's one little thing I wanted to share with you in terms of a diagram on the top right. I'm not sure, I think I said it before. Now the demand curve for labour. So I'm just going to draw a little set of axes on the top right here. It's not too much. So obviously we've got units here, output, and then we've got the wage rate, or the price of labour, is essentially what it is. And you get some kind of curve that does this. And if we gave a wage rate of W1 here, then we'd get a demand for labour, the quantity supplied for labour there, of Q1, and a quantity supplied over there, Q1A. Now the reason you might get asked sometimes, why do we focus on just the sloping? Because normally when you see demand curve for labour, it'll just be a straight slopewards down sloping demand curve for labour, and that's because when we go sort of, see we've got 2 points there. Let's sort of point them out. Yeah, there we are. So basically we've got 2 points there, and we'll always want to, because we're paying in the same wage rate, so why would we want a smaller amount of workers as opposed to a larger amount of workers? Because this obviously would reduce our total revenue, and this would increase it, obviously increasing our profits. And back to what I said about firms being profit maximisers, and that's a general consensus anyway. So we'd want to produce at that unit there, so Q1A. So that's why, that's sort of on the downward sloping bit, and that's why we'd always pick the downward sloping bit. That's why generally in textbooks you're seeing it's just a sloping demand curve diagonally downwards, sorry. So there you go, hopefully that's made some kind of sense to you. I'll just give you a few minutes if you need to pause the video at the end just to note down any of the key bits of information there that I've gone through. Again, any comments or anything, I've gone through it a little bit too fast there, but I didn't want to spend the rest of the time going through that. So hopefully, as I said, it's been of some help. And any comments or anything you want to pass on to me, or any questions you want to ask, don't be afraid, just put them in the comments section, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.